The Senior Rehab Project is supported by the Game Changers, a group of motivated rehab clinicians that are crushing mediocrity and advancing care for older adults. You can join this group of people and get access to the private Facebook group, the monthly meetup with article discussions, and have a say in the direction of this movement. Get off the sidelines and get involved. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com/Game Changers. Hit me!
This is a Senior Rehab Podcast, the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
Hey friends, this is Erinn Carey. I wanted to take a minute to chat with you all about Senior Rehab Podcast at the Combined Sections meeting in New Orleans. So Dustin, Tolly, and I will all be there doing things like Facebook Live interviews, live tweeting cool talks, and hopefully seeing you at one of our two big events. So they're both on Friday, February 23rd. The first one is Town Hall CSM. So it's at 6:30 a.m. Now I know what you're thinking. Erinn, I'm going to be out all night Thursday, and you expect me to wake up and be somewhere at 6:30? The answer is yes. You'll be fine. And there's free coffee. And hopefully there will be some soy milk for me and Joe Daniels. We shall see. This is a panel with Carol Lewis, Tim Fox, Kathy Shirley, and Joe Daniels, and is being moderated by our very own Dustin Jones, where they will all be talking about the geriatric revolution. Next, Old Not Weak 2.0, Strengthening the Older Adult with Dustin Jones and Christina Previtt. So that's also Friday the 23rd at 11 a.m., which is a little later, admittedly, in the Hilton Riverside Chart B. So this is with the home health section of the APTA, and if you're unsure about exercise prescription for older adults, or you want to know how strength training can impact your patients' lives, this is the presentation for you. And a quick note, last year the Old Not Weak presentation was nuts, so be sure to get there early for a seat. I think last year was like standing room only. So for more information about these two events, go to seniorrehabproject.com/CSM. And then after Old Not Weak 2.0, we're doing an SRP meetup. I'm not sure where it's going to be at the time of this recording, but keep an eye out on the Facebook group for details. That being said, on to the episode. I had the amazing opportunity to sit down with Marilyn Moffat in her office at NYU, which admittedly is like a few blocks from my apartment. And I got to ask her a few questions that our Game Changers wanted to know. So for those of you who don't know, Dr. Moffat is truly a legend in our field. She served as president of the APTA from 1991 to 1997, and as the president of the World Confederation for Physical Therapy from 2007 to 2015. And if you look at her bio on NYU's website, her publications and awards number in the hundreds. It just goes on and on. So I'm very excited to share this with you all, the listeners, and I hope that you enjoy. Among her many titles are things such as the former president of the APTA, the former president of the World Confederation of Physical Therapy, clinician, lecturer, researcher. Dr. Moffat, thank you for sitting down with me today.
My pleasure, Erinn.
All right, so I have a list of questions here from our listeners.
Okay.
These are things that they have asked us specifically what they want to know about you, so I'm just going to go through those. First, what do you want everyone to know about working with the geriatric population?
Oh, there are probably lots and lots of things, but from my perspective, it's the joy of working with this population. There's nothing more rewarding than seeing people who have been on a downhill decline change so dramatically to get back into totally functional and fun lives.
Definitely. What were the key experiences and opportunities that led you down your clinical path, your academic path, and leadership roles within the APTA? I know it's
okay.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Probably I can sum up things in terms of my clinical path in that I was not a physical therapist initially. I came through an academic baccalaureate degree, not in physical therapy. So I came from a very strong exercise and exercise science background, as well as having an education minor in my undergraduate degree before I became a PT. So thus I came to physical therapy with those skills that were certainly enhanced with my PT education, but also laid a very, very strong foundation for much of my practice throughout my entire life. So that sort of laid its background for my clinical path. My academic path, again, I had an education minor, so I did student teaching, and then I taught for a while. So I did not learn to teach, again, through doing in-services in hospital or other environments later on. I had a very strong foundation in education. And then the leadership has been a part of my life, really, most of my life. I probably could go back to the second grade when I was elected class president. And it's just escalated since then. But I've paid my dues throughout the entire process. I mean, I've never gone into a leadership position without having a thorough grounding in the organization, in the association, with a thorough understanding of what kinds of goals and activities I wanted to see achieved, regardless of what the position was. I mean, I think nowadays, particularly with some of this younger generation, they think that they should be presidents tomorrow without taking the time to really fully understand all of the background. And I do think that understanding that awareness of and also involvement at multiple levels provides the knowledge base and the skills to be a really good leader.
So you would say someone who maybe wanted to follow a similar path as you, learn about the organization, pay your dues, do different things within the organization. That's the sort of advice you'd give? Yeah.
I mean, I started at grassroots. I mean, one of my earliest activities was serving as editor of the New York Physical Therapy Association newsletter way back. And that led to committee appointments and task force appointments, and then eventually election as district chair. And then I became president of the New York Physical Therapy Association, and then things escalated. But all the way along the way, I had a ton of experience at committee and task force levels and consultative levels as well prior to assuming the real big leadership roles.
Yeah, that makes sense, because then you need to know how the different inner workings work in order to properly lead them.
And it's not only the inner workings of the organizational structure itself, but it's also knowing the key players and who you can tap and who you can call on. I mean, to me, a leader is only as good as utilizing the persons around them who have better skills than they do. And I think, you always shine as a leader when you're not afraid to have others with much greater capabilities right there with you.
I'm on board with that, definitely. It's knowing your own limitations and figuring out the others who can supplement them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So how have you continued to maintain passion throughout your career?
It's pretty easy when you love what you do.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think if a PT doesn't love what they do, they shouldn't be doing it. I don't think I've ever gotten up in the morning and put my feet on the floor and thought, oh my God, I don't want to do this today. I mean, I really have honest and truly loved what I've done, whether it's been my practice, whether it's been my education, whether it's been my teaching, or whether it's been my administration or leadership, whatever it is. I just have learned so much from every one of those experiences and totally enjoyed most all of them.
Excellent. Moving on to something a little less happy and warm, fuzzy feeling. What worries you the most about our future? And, well, first, let's do with that. What worries you most about the future of PT?
Well, I think probably that certainly the sense of entitlement that I see in the younger generation. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that to a certain extent. But I think it does place a different perspective on what you do and how you do it. We're a service profession, and service provides and needs people who are willing to provide that service for the right reasons. PTs can make a lot of money in various aspects of practice, and I'm not in any way denigrating that because I come from a financial family. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there has got to be that humility and the humbleness and that willingness to serve and looking for all the altruistic things that APTA has certainly put forth in its core values. And that, to me, I think, is hopefully what we'll continue to see in the long run.
What do you think a solution to that would look like?
I think generations change, and I think they'll change again, is the way I look at it, Right. I really do. I think a lot of the younger generation has been brought up through their family lives with a sense of entitlement. I mean, they've been given a great deal and in many instances, and they've come to expect that things will always be happy. I think in much of their educational experiences prior to getting into PT school, they've gotten a lot of A's with doing relatively little work. And so, therefore, those kinds of things are permeated. And I just, I certainly see that, but I also see the possibilities for great change, and I think it will.
What do you feel is the biggest change you have seen in the profession since you first graduated?
Oh, my goodness. I can cite multiple things. I mean, when I worked in rehab in the early days, if we had a patient with a spinal cord lesion, that patient was, if they were paraplegic, they were in there for 6 months to 8 months. And if they had quadriplegia, they were in there oftentimes for a year. So you see a dramatic change in terms of numbers of visits and times of stay. So I think that has changed. But you know what? It's changed for good reasons. First of all, the data are showing that you don't need to have that kind of lengthy stay. You don't need those many visits. Technology has also made a very big difference in what we can do, particularly with those patients with spinal cord lesions. So there have been very, very dramatic changes in that area. On the other hand, we've seen unbelievable changes in practice because of insurance company control of practice, which I personally have a very big problem with. I think it's one of the reasons why I decided to have a practice the way it is. I have a highly consultative practice. I have one-on-one. I take an hour to, with my patients or a little bit more on the first visit. And that's the way I'm going to practice until I totally retire. But I also understand not everybody can do that. And it's really very difficult because the insurance companies are only there for keeping the visits down as much as they can and making as much money as they can and paying us as little as they need to pay us. So I think, those changes are going to continue. I don't see massive changes with insurance attitude. But what I think we can do, I think we can look at how we provide services. I mean, I think for the majority of our patients and clients, it's very difficult to justify 3-4 times a week in terms of treatment. Now, I would say certainly if I have a patient with a cord lesion, I have a patient with an amputation, I have a patient with an immediate strong stroke, that individual is going to need, obviously, high level interventions early on. But I also know there are a lot of our patients and clients that, we could see them initially and then maybe see them 6 to 10 times over 3 to 6 months and probably get as much done in the long run as following the kind of mode of interventions that we've often done. So I think, we have to embrace that sort of lifelong commitment for our patients and clients to enhance their making themselves better under our guidance and also instilling in them a behavior change that will get them on their path to, again, a full integrated life in society that's pleasing to them and pleasing to others around them.
I hear you say that, and I just wonder, how could we communicate that sort of value to the insurance companies?
Well, I think we have to start showing them that, don't give me 6 visits over 2 weeks, or don't give me 14 visits over a month. If I want 14 visits, allow me to determine how I should use those 14 visits, particularly when you can begin to show the data that are out there indicating those patients who have the spaced out visits over time will do as well, sometimes better, than those who have a clump of visits at the very beginning, and then you don't see them. I mean, particularly with my patient populations that's in the geriatric arena, my goodness, I can't make major changes in muscle or bone or anything else, over 2 weeks. That kind of magician I'm not. And none of us are. So, I think, allow me to do what I know best. Allow me to use the data, and let's, in some way or another, bombard those insurance companies and get them to understand changes have got to be made.
So that's where, the advocacy piece comes in.
Oh, my God. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are the biggest challenges you have faced in your career?
Oh, my goodness. Well, obviously, I'm a woman and have been all throughout my career. And I can tell you, while this holds not quite as much right now, there's still some discrepancies between males and females. Certainly, in my earliest practice days and for many years afterwards, the percentage of males, percentage-wise, earned more than women did in PT. Percentage-wise, males had more administrative positions than female PTs. Percentage-wise, males had more advanced degrees than females, believe it or not. So those presented their challenges. And, PT was under the thumb of medicine for a very long period of time, which all of you who are graduates now of DPT programs and have autonomous practice or relatively independent practice in states cannot understand that, you needed a physician's not only referral, but you needed a prescription. And those prescriptions were insane because the docs didn't know anything about PT, but they could prescribe for PT. So that was certainly early challenges in my life. Fortunately, I had a lot of time in a rehab facility where the physicians in those days were not physiatrists for the most part. They came out of internal medicine, the likes of Howard Rusk and Deaver and Kovolt and all those physicians. And they basically let physical therapists do what physical therapists were trained best to do. So I had an early orientation that sort of said, I know what physical therapy is and I know what's best for my patients and clients. So that did help. The other thing is I came from a very strong business family. And I had a father who was amazingly supportive of his 2 daughters. And I think that certainly provided me with the foundations to pursue my goals.
So you were a part of that push to like get out from under the thumb of physicians, correct?
Yeah. It was during my presidency in the New York chapter that we finally got our first recodification of our Practice Act, where we eliminated the prescription. We had to retain the referral for basically provision, but we eliminated the referral for examination and prevention in that Practice Act revision way back then.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was New York one of the first states to do that?
No, there were earlier states and they got better things than we do. But, unfortunately, Albany, as you may or may not know, has been totally controlled by medicine when it comes to health. And that is even the case today. I mean, it's still...
Even now, after all this time.
Yeah, even now, it's pretty much apparent. Mm-hmm.
Bummer.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we still have here in New York State, 30 days or 10 visits, whichever comes first, as opposed to a blanket autonomous independent practice.
So is that something you're still working for?
I still do a little bit with the state. I sort of have to, pick my areas that I sort of allot my time. And so I do what I can. I may do lobby day with them occasionally. And certainly I'm always supportive from a PAC perspective, both at the state and the federal level. So in those arenas, I will help to what extent I can.
How do you encourage therapists to use evidence-based treatment methods?
Erinn, this is probably a question that shouldn't even have to be asked, but I know it has to be. It sort of makes my back hair stand on end because I know there's lots of practice out there where PTs are not using the evidence, and that's appalling in this day and age. I mean, it's the one thing that I am eternally grateful in terms of our curriculum here at New York University, because for all the examination courses, for all the intervention courses, and for the procedural interventions, we say, what is the evidence? And students must come up with that evidence. So hopefully we begin to instill in them very early on the fact that the evidence is there and you've got to use it. I mean, I think one of the things that I've pointed out so many times in my presentations, particularly in the geriatric arena, Walter Frontera and Maria Fiatarone were 2 researchers back in the late 80s and early 90s. And Frontera did his first major study as it relates to our populations back in 1988. And he took community-dwelling individuals who were 72 years of age. He gave them 80% of 1RM 3 times a week for 12 weeks. And what he found out, 114% increase in quad strength, 227% increase in hamstring strength. So that was Frontera with community-based. Then Maria came along, and what she did, again, is she took individuals. Well, I should back up first and say that after Frontera took male community dwelling, he also looked at women, and he found very similar strength gains. Not quite as dramatic as men, but certainly there, only because men, muscle-wise and everything else, probably had a little bit greater capabilities than most women. And had a little aspect of testosterone, which helped, and those kinds of things. But then Maria Fiatarone, now Fiatarone Singh, did the first research to use 80% of 1RM with a group of patients in skilled nursing facilities. So these were patients with mean age of 90 years of age. They were frail and they had a ton of comorbid conditions. So these weren't, super healthy individuals where she could say, I took 90-year-olds and made them better. She put them in strength building machines. So she did leg press and knee extension. 3 times a week, 80% 1RM for 8 weeks. And what she found was 174% increase in 1RM leg strength, no injuries, no events, and the attendance, which was totally voluntary, was almost 100%. The only time they ever missed a session is if they were called for an x-ray or they had a test to do or something else. Nursing home residents. Now, that was back in 1990. Now, we knew this then. Did PTs apply those? Absolutely not. I mean, how can we negate the evidence that's been out there for such a long time? And it's not only in terms of strength. They've shown the studies in terms of bone building, in terms of flexibility, in terms of balance, in terms of aerobic capacity. You name it, the data are out there. And they've been out there for a long enough period of time that we should have been applying it all the way along. I mean, it, again, makes my hair stand on end when I see PTs doing 3 sets of 15 reps of straight leg raise, and at the end of 3 sets of 15 reps of straight leg raise, the patient is still not tired and could do more. What a waste of that patient or client's time. So, you know what? The data are there. The evidence is there.
No excuses.
None whatsoever. None. And it's been there for a long time. As I said, if the data were just brand new, that's one thing. But the early data that came out in the 80s and 90s have only been compounded by increasing amounts of data. And now the latest data showing on changes in cognitive function and all those other things, I mean, I just don't know how we can ever negate using it. And I can show you data for almost every patient-client diagnostic category, whether it's patients with Parkinson's disease or patients with multiple sclerosis or patients with osteoporosis or patients with sarcopenia. I can show you hundreds and hundreds of studies that show that what we should be doing is at the highest intensity possible. And again, a very different orientation to what I often see in clinical practice.
Wow. So disappointment from you is how, yeah. I mean, it's really like, there's truly no excuses for doing anything but high intensity type, like
I know.
80%.
And there's no excuse not to look at the literature in this day and age. I read approximately 40 to 50 journals a month, but I do that by getting the journal online. I have a setup on my computer that gives me every journal. I click on the table of contents and I flip through the table of contents. If an article pertains to me, then I'll look at the abstract. If the abstract pertains, I'll look deeper into it. But I can go through those journals so quickly nowadays. There's no excuse.
Do you have advice for those who don't have institutional access, that don't have access to these articles?
You know what? Keep abreast at least with APTA. You know, the sections all have publications and they look at, the studies that are being done through the sections and that are being published in the section publications. Look at the APTA publications. Always look at the reference lists at the end. I mean, there are tons of data out there.
One of our listeners specifically wanted to know about the relationship between the APTA and the ACSM and the exercise is medicine specialist issue.
Yeah, it's an issue, but it isn't an issue. I mean, PTs have not been recognized as part of exercise as medicine in the U.S. That's not true abroad. I mean, you go to other countries internationally, and PTs have been part of the global exercise as medicine network. The difficulty right now is there's been a whole change at ACSM, and the person who has been in control of the exercise as medicine component at ACSM has been replaced by somebody else. And she is now undergoing and doing a total review of the whole exercise as medicine program. So all of our negotiations, which at this point we had totally agreed on how PTs could be at level 1 and level 2 and level 3 and all of the intricacies of what were needed for each of the levels. So it's on hold at the moment. And that's really all I can say because it's on hold. And it's on hold because of the changes at ACSM.
Is there a time frame in which it's going to be on hold for? Do they give you any indication?
There's none that I know of. Yeah. I mean, I don't blame somebody coming in wanting to do a total review of the program. They're also looking at their own requirements for their credentials as to whether they're appropriate or not. So until that's all ironed out, then we'll have to go back and renegotiate. I don't think we'll be renegotiating much because I think we had certainly come philosophically a long way in the past couple of years in those negotiations. And that working group that I was part of was really a phenomenal group of ACSM and PT.
So you say that globally, that sort of relationship between exercise as medicine and PTs is it's there.
It's almost a given. I mean, in most of the countries abroad that have exercise as medicine networks, the PTs have just been there. And I don't know, whether it was, turf battles here in the U.S. or what, I'm not quite sure. And I certainly don't want to go back and look at any of that because I think the important thing is hopefully we'll begin to move forward in this whole arena once ACSM gets itself organized and squared away.
Is there anything that we can do as clinicians to encourage the relationship between the ACSM and physical therapists?
I just, attend their meetings, be part of them as well. I mean, but I think if you have a choice of membership, take APTA. So, and, hopefully there'll be a lot more interaction over time.
In that same vein, besides becoming a member of the APTA, what are ways that you would suggest that you could get more involved nationally or on a state level?
Just volunteer. Get started, volunteering for a task force, for a committee, letting the state association know that you'd like to be involved. There's always jobs to do. And just tell them your area of interest. Are you interested in advocacy? Are you interested in, public relations? Are you interested in education? Let them know and they'll find a slot.
Are there things that people can do if they live far away from the city centers?
Particularly the more rural area is obviously it's going to be difficult because oftentimes meetings are concentrated in the more urban areas rather than in the rural areas. But having said that, there's so much stuff online nowadays. APTA does wonderful, online courses, webinars, all of those things. So that's all there.
So what professional advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
Oh, I don't know. I was pretty happy with what I was doing along the way. I don't know that I would have changed too very much. Would I have pushed harder, faster? I don't know. I think I was really happy that I went through the sort of training ground that I did and had the experiences that I did because, as I said, when I assumed the top leadership positions, both at APTA and WCPT, I knew those organizations inside out. And I started early on in my career. I felt that, if I want to change, and I was always basically a change agent, the only way I thought that I could effectuate change is to do it from the inside out. And just to get out there and, make comments and not be supportive of your organization doesn't get change done. So I'd much rather fight from the inside to the best of my ability to get the changes made that I thought needed to be done. One of the big things that we certainly did when I was APTA president, and I say we collectively because it was a huge, massive effort, was the development of the Guide to Physical Therapist Practice. And we involved hundreds of people in that process. And for the first time, really said, okay, here's what we do and how we do it. And here are the things that are important for PTs to be aware of and the rest of the world to be aware of. And, how that document has been used over the years, not only by PTs, but insurance companies and outside agencies and everything else. Had a major impact.
Wow. So you were able to draft the guide with this group of people and it influenced policy and insurance
absolutely.
And practice.
Absolutely. Yeah. We did the normative model for PT education in those days as well. So there was a lot of things. We started the first PR program.
You were on the ground floor for a lot of really important, influential things.
There were a lot of things done during that 6-year period of time, but I had an absolutely fantastic board of 14 other people with me. And as I said, my attitude has always been, let me find the brightest, best people that I can find to get the jobs done. And that's what happened.
What have you changed your mind about in the past 10 years?
Oh, I think as I've aged, I all too well know how important PT's roles are, particularly with the aging population. And I think if I had my druthers, I would love to engender a real love of the aging population in every one of my students. That's not going to happen because ortho is so much in their minds when they come into a PT program, but they don't know what they're missing. To me, I love the excitement and the challenge of individuals who have comorbid conditions and present the challenges that make my life exciting and fun. I would love to see, we've been battling this therapy cap for so many years and never gotten anywhere beyond it. In fact, we're still at a mess. Hopefully, maybe this time it will change. But I would much have preferred to see us putting a ton of money and getting PTs into the Welcome to Medicare program so that every individual joining Medicare would have to have a visit by a PT. It's like they have to have their medical visit. So why shouldn't they have a PT visit? Because you know what? We could run them through a battery of very quick tests. We could do an aerobic test. We could do a strength test. We could do a balance test. We could do a flexibility test, and we could do a posture test. And you know what? They'd have a ton of information from a PT if they just did 5 little things prior to, again, at the same time they're joining the Medicare program.
Is that something you're actively working on?
Well, I've certainly, I had a motion before the House years ago that tried to request that, but at that time they said it was going to be too expensive to do it. And, when I think of the millions we've spent on the cap, I would love to have seen those millions spent on Welcome to Medicare. But, you pick and choose your battles. And I would still push for this, and I still think it's an important thing for us to do.
After serving our profession on a national level and an international level, what do you wish most clinicians knew or understood? Well,
I think I wish that they would see real value in membership in APTA and belonging and also participating. I think nowadays, again, priorities have changed. In the early days, we used to use our membership and our organizational things, not only for advancing the profession, but it was a real socialization for us. I mean, I have friends that I made back in the 60s just through my APTA and New York Physical Therapy Association activities. People to this day that I still have dinner with on a regular basis. I don't think that happens as much anymore. And that's sad for me, and I think sad for them. But I would love to see a little bit more of that coming back in, and people really embracing their membership in the organizational structures. You know, they don't always have to participate. I mean, there have been priorities in my life where I've had to change things in terms of family responsibilities. But I never stopped paying my dues, and I never stopped supporting things to the best of my ability, even if it was more remote than my hands-on activities. And I would certainly hope that all of us would embrace that. And I know, as you probably indicated earlier, Erinn, you know, people always say it's too expensive to belong to APTA. You know what? When you look at the percentage of your salary, it is a minor expense. I mean, I look at how much people pay for a coffee. I don't care what the shop is nowadays. I mean, you don't walk away without a $6 tab, you know. Take that, times it by your APTA dues, and see how many cups of coffee it would take to be a member of APTA and supportive of the association.
And I think being a member of the APTA would get you more benefit than
the coffee. Absolutely. Yeah. From my perspective, it does.
So this wasn't one of the questions, but it's something I'm curious about. I want to hear more about your time as president of the WCPT and what sort of projects you worked on.
Well, I had worked on a lot of projects before coming president of WCPT. I was very involved with the North American Caribbean region, and through the region, we put several motions to the deliberative body of WCPT that led to the establishment of guidelines for education, guidelines for accreditation, guidelines for faculty, guidelines for clinical education, standards of practice. So all of those things basically came through motions that I helped to get through the North American Caribbean region, which then went to the WCPT deliberative body. And then my whole attitude while president of WCPT was certainly the importance of trying to let people know what the World Confederation did. And it's unlike APTA because you're not an individual member of WCPT. The United States is the member. So it's the country that's the member. And I always look to develop things using the resources of the better off, well-to-do countries with incredible resources to help those that didn't have those resources. So that was one of my biggest thrusts, is to try and provide as many resources out there as we can on the internet, on the web, that an educational program starting in Nepal could pick up and use based on, again, input from the U.S., from Canada, from Australia, from Germany, from wherever, where their resources were much more extensive than small, underserved countries.
So like a standardized group of resources that has been put together that is accessible by all.
Right, exactly. And you'll see that if you go onto WCPT's website, that's all there.
What do you want people to know about the WCPT? Like, what do you think PTs in the United States don't understand about it?
Well, I think they don't understand that they're not officially members except through APTA.
True.
So it's a very different structure. Even dues-wise, your country pays the dues. So you don't have an individual dues structure. So it makes a different kind of orientation. And there are lots of wonderful opportunities from a global perspective to get involved. And there's so much need in so many of these countries. I mean, I've gone into countries with the most incredibly small resources that do fabulous things. And if I've ever been able to help, you know, anytime I ever was asked to go to a country, I always said, okay, what can I do to teach a course? What can I do to help facilitate? And I think a lot of that came very early on. I had the good fortune of teaching and practicing during the summer months in Southeast Asia for almost 11 years, way back in the 80s. And so I had a great understanding of countries that didn't have major resources, and yet to look at the changes since the times when I was there has really been quite phenomenal. And so I sort of had that imbued in my system very early on.
Is there anything that you want our listeners to know about you? Any projects that you're working on?
I'm always involved in something.
True. Are you going to CSM?
Of course, yes. The nice thing about it is being able to go to the meetings now and not have to worry about what I needed to do to prepare for them. So I can just go and have a good time and learn as much as I possibly can learn. And again, meet with friends. I mean, that's a great portion of often what I do is a whole socialization aspect at those meetings for me.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me and tell us your story and let our listeners learn about you.
Great, Erinn. It was my pleasure.
Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. If you only listen to these podcast episodes, you are missing out on 90% of the Senior Rehab Project. Hop on over to seniorrehabproject.com where you can join the movement that's advancing care for older adults. You can join for free or become a part of the Game Changers where you can get some free gear and access to our monthly meetup. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com. I appreciate y'all, and I'll talk with you soon. But in the meantime, do not forget to stay funky.